All right, welcome to our closing circle for It's Move Academy. We're so happy to be with you. Thank you for listening to this call. Thank you, Marcello, Michele, Fritjof, for being with us in this call. I'm Della, and I just wanted to share now that the course is complete, the special Capra course is complete. We're excited to welcome you to be alumni. And alumni is all the alumni are part of a larger community. The Capra Course alumni is a very large and interactive, dynamic, global group. So we're so happy to welcome you to that. First thing is that we have quarterly gatherings, and these are on the solstice and the equinox of each part of the year. And so the next one is regenerative finance and the effects of ignoring the system's view of life. And that's on March 20th. So that's coming up March 20th, and it's from 10 to 11:30 Pacific time. And since you're going to be alumni, you'll be getting that newsletter, but just want to make sure that that's on your radar, that the March Equinox alumni gathering is coming up, because we would love for all of you to join us for that. And the other thing about being an alumni, before we dive into our conversation today, I just want to share my screen to show you the alumni platform. So we have a special platform just for alumni to be able to connect, to share resources, to revisit course materials, and to ask questions. So this is what the alumni network looks like. And you'll be getting an email from Sylvia welcoming you to this platform. And for this platform, you have your profile, which you can click on, and you can design your profile with your name and photos of you and just a little bit about yourself. We have the forum, and the forum is a place where we really can get into conversation. We have lots of different topics: announcements, introduce yourselves, the alumni gatherings, needs and offers, and then lots of really fun topics for people to collaborate, to share books and projects, etc. So please check these out, and be sure to subscribe to things like announcements and alumni gatherings so that you get direct messages whenever someone posts about that. We have the resources here, which is the Capra Course update video, the lecture summaries, the forum libraries, the lecture series itself, alumni gathering recordings, etc. So you can dive into that. Here's the members if you want to check who's online, but also just search for a member. And there's so many members here, so feel free to search or to explore who folks are. Then we have a group section, which is all these groups that people have created, and you can create one too. Different languages are there, so there's some in Italian, but these are groups that can come together around different topics or theories. The Capra Course alumni in India, for example, or Vipassana meditation. So feel free to check those out, and if you don't see one that interests you, you can join one. And then we have the help in case you want to look something up. So I just want to make sure that you all know that the gatherings are there coming up for you to join, and then that alumni platform is there. And then finally, we also have a Facebook group just for alumni of the course. So if you're on Facebook, we invite you to join that. And that's if you just search Fritjof Capra's course alumni, you'll find it, and you can join us there. So just wanted to welcome you to that.
Let me add, Della,
Yeah.
remind everybody, you mentioned the update video in the resources. What it is a 40-minute video in which I discuss scientific discoveries and advances that were made since I recorded the lectures of the course. You see, I've taught this course for 8 years now, and a lot has happened in science in those 8 years. So there are some very exciting discoveries that I discuss. And to me, the exciting thing is that these discoveries often dramatically confirm the theoretical framework that I developed in my synthesis. So I'm very happy about that, and I recommend this video very highly.
Yes, we definitely do. And again, that's on that platform. So please check that out. You're going to want to watch that. So we just thought for this recording, we wanted to make those announcements. And then we just wanted to hand over to Michele to ask the questions that you all brought to him to share with Fritjof. So I'm going to hand over to you, Michele, for those questions and discussion.
Thank you, Dela. Hi, Fritjof.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. I would like to simply celebrate this first edition of the special Capra course for ETS Move. We went through your 12 lectures and tried to reason together about the implication that were emerging, our reflections. In a technical education institute, such as ETS Move, personal growth is critical, as well as attention to one's view of the world, of things, of relationships. We would like to bring you some questions that came to us and to me. Is it okay for you, Fritjof?
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Great. So, we are a community of people in training, okay? So, what is your wish for young people in training?
Well, I think my greatest wish is that young people understand the state of the world, of our era, from a systemic point of view. And this not only because this is my field of work and I'm very excited about it, but it is also critical to solve the problems of our time. So this is so because most of the global problems we face today, energy, environment, climate change, economic inequality, and most recently, the tragic resurgence of violence and war in these two wars that we're having now. These problems none of them can be understood in isolation. They are systemic problems, which means they are completely interdependent and interconnected, and they need a systemic view in order to be understood and solved. So, for example, let's take climate change. If we produce massive numbers of electric cars, that will help climate change, obviously, because it will reduce emissions. But if we promote unlimited economic growth at the same time, so that all the other industries pollute even more, then we haven't done anything. So one of my, if you remember from the lectures, one of my points about economics and politics is that at the basis of these interconnected problems is our obsession with economic growth, the obsession of corporate and political economists with this illusion that things can grow and material consumption can grow infinitely on a finite planet. That alone, if your students understand that alone and really act on it in their various professions, that would make me very satisfied about the course.
Well, you describe a difference between good growth and bad growth, because life is inherently has to do something with perpetual growth. But
that's right, absolutely. And what happens in nature, of course, growth is an essential part of life, but not everything grows all the time. So, organisms or ecosystems would grow, reach a maturity, and then decline and disintegrate and liberate the resources to be recycled for new growth. So it's a cyclical growth. I call it qualitative growth, but you can call it good growth. And I know in Italy there is this term decrescita, no? And that's a similar term. That's what I call qualitative growth.
Great, thank you.
So in order to, let me just elaborate a little more. The distinction between good growth and bad growth from an ecological point of view is very simple, very easy. The bad growth is growth that uses toxic substances, that emits carbon, that uses non-renewable energy sources, endangers, say, people in agriculture, for instance, with toxics and so on. And
spread inequality.
Yeah, increases inequality, destroys local communities, and so on. Good growth is the opposite of all that. It's regenerative, community-oriented, sustainable, non-toxic, and so on. So the distinction is very easy once you understand the basics.
So we need also skills in order to understand this point of view and to try to do things in the world. So nowadays we talk a lot about skills. Skills means match and so on. So I'm asking you, which skills do you think are the most important to learn today? And what would you call systemic skills?
Well, I think I would be very interested in an experiment here. And the experiment would be to get your cohort of young people together and say, look, during your whole life, you have lived with social networks. And what we are saying in the course here is that there are not only social networks, but the network is the basic pattern of organization of all life. So we have biological networks, we have ecological networks, and we have social networks. And so how can we transfer the skills you already have to deal with social networks that you have developed over the last, say, 10 years? Let's identify what those skills are, and let's see how they transfer to systems thinking in general, to think in terms of networks. I think that would be very important. And if you do that, and if you have some good results, you could publish this as a book, and I think it would have a tremendous impact and would be a bestseller, because this is something nobody has done, you know?
It's an interesting topic. Well, social network is a recent technology and could be used in a good way or in a bad way too, and also could be experienced with a good feeling or with a bad feeling. It's
Right.
very complex and actual. And yeah, I agree with you. It's a nice point to start from. Let me ask you, how would you describe the characteristics or the patterns of life? I know you have 4.
Yes. Well, this is something that I do also in this update video. So for those of our listeners who don't quite remember it or cannot take notes, you can go to this video and you have the complete description. What happened was that in the last few years teaching the Capra course, I had countless discussions with my students, and in these discussions, I found a new way of summarizing my synthesis of the systems view of life. This new way is based on the theories that I teach in the course, so it's scientifically sound, but it is expressed in non-technical language. And I do so in terms of 4 principles of life, which are basic principles of organization of all living systems from the smallest bacteria through the wide range of plants, animals, to humans, and also to social systems and ecosystem. So they are embodied, these principles are embodied in all forms of life. And those people who have taken the Capra course will remember the scientific theories that go with them. So here we go. The first principle is life organizes itself in networks. We are coming back to networks. And actually, this principle contains two ideas. One is that the network is the basic pattern of organization of all living systems. And the second idea is that life organizes itself, which means that the network pattern is not imposed on the system, but is created by the living system itself. So that's the first principle. The second principle, well, then maybe I should say that a characteristic of living networks is that they, and this is quite a subtle point, living networks are not networks of structures, but are networks of processes. For example, ecological networks, or so-called food webs, are networks of feeding processes. Cellular networks are networks of processes of production of molecules. So these networks are networks of processes, and generally speaking, we can ask, what are these processes? We're talking about the life process. What is the life process? Well, today we have an answer. The life process is a process of regeneration. And that is my second principle. Life is intrinsically regenerative. Now, when you think about that, then you realize that the regeneration of life in nature is something we all know. We just have to think about the turn of the seasons. You know, now we are getting into spring, and in spring there's growth and blossoms everywhere. You know, nature wakes up again after the winter. That's regeneration. That's the continual regeneration. But what is new in the systems view is that this regeneration works at all levels of complexity, down to the molecular networks in cells. And you may remember that technically this is known as the theory of autopoiesis, the continual regeneration of these cellular networks. So that's the second principle. The third principle is that life is intrinsically creative. And this, here I refer to the process known as emergence, the spontaneous emergence of new forms of order at critical points of instability. This is a basic characteristic of all living systems, and it represents the creativity inherent in life. So this is actually something very new that scientists understood only very recently. And I think it's very important because, and it's very important for you students when they work on their own development, on their own self-image and all these things you mentioned before, because they can realize that they will be creative, not only if they happen to be artists or designers or, you know, in some so-called creative profession. No, everybody is creative, simply because we are alive. We are creative because life itself is inherently creative. So that's the third principle. And the fourth principle, equally important, is that life is intrinsically intelligent. And that, again, is something radically new. Technically, this is known as the Santiago theory of cognition, which says the interactions of a living organism with its environment are cognitive interactions, which means they are directed by the organism, both in the sense of what it will notice, and how it will respond. We can also describe this situation in a different way by saying that all living organisms interact with their environment through sensory organs. And there's an old philosophical term that living beings are sentient beings. And these sentient interactions are identified as cognitive interactions. And I think that is very important for the way in which we deal with our natural environment. If you remember in the history of science in the 17th century, scientists like Galileo, Descartes, Newton, so we have an Italian, a French, and an English scientist who all treated the world as a machine. And when you're dealing with a machine, then the proper way is to control it. Just think of when you're driving your car. If you can't control the car, you get into trouble. But when you deal with a living network that is creative, self-organizing, and intelligent, then the interaction will be quite different. So this has a lot of practical implications and a lot of ethical implications. So those are the four principles. Life organizes itself in networks, and these living networks are intrinsically regenerative, creative, and intelligent. And I really love this formulation because not only is it non-technical, but it's also evocative. Those are terms people can relate to at a personal level. You know, regeneration, creativity, intelligence. These are terms of common human experience. So I hope very much that your students will be able to use them.
Yeah, I think it really resonates to me, and I think these four principles could really resonate with everybody. That's a nice point. So our students are discovering their ways in life. So let me ask you, how do you discover your way?
Well, I think here we have a situation where we can turn bad news into good news. And the situation is that we are facing a multifaceted global crisis. And the crisis is so widespread that if you want to do something to help, to change the world, it doesn't matter where you start, because the crisis is everywhere. So if you are a teacher, you can teach differently. If you are a cook, you can cook differently. If you are a carpenter, you can make cabinets differently in terms of where you source your materials and so on, how you use your various resources. If you are an architect, you can build differently. If you are a designer, you design differently, and so on. So I would say to find your way, find where your passion is, and then choose that field. And I can guarantee you that when you go into this field, whatever the field is, there are different ways of working in it. There is a sustainable, regenerative, ecological way, and then there is an extractive, non-ecological, damaging way. And you have the choice. So whatever field you choose, go for it.
Sounds good. May I ask you, what led you to study systemic thinking?
Well, this is a long story, and I actually recently wrote a book about it, which is a collection of essays. In the Italian edition, it's called Le relazioni della vita, and it is a collection of essays from 5 decades connected with a narrative. And in the narrative, the narrative is a sort of an intellectual history. So this whole book will give you the answer, but I can just summarize it that I started out as a physicist. I did research in theoretical physics, high energy physics for 20 years. And I was also very interested in philosophy, especially in Eastern philosophy and Eastern spiritual traditions. And I discovered significant parallels between the concepts of modern physics and the basic ideas in these Eastern traditions. And I wrote a book about it, which is called The Tao of Physics, which I published now 50 years ago. And at the very end of the book, in the epilogue, on the very last page, I make a statement which says that our society at present is not consistent with the harmonious worldview, the integrative worldview that emerges from modern physics and that is present in Eastern spiritual traditions. And to change it, we need a fundamental change. So after the book, then, I talked with many people, I lectured to many people from many walks of life, many professions, and I became interested in what changes there could be in other areas, in biology, in economics, in psychology, in management, in design, in medicine and nursing, and so on. And sometime in the 1980s, in the early 1980s, I realized that all these fields had to do with life, with individual organisms, with social systems, and with ecosystems. And physics has nothing to say about life. It is relevant to describe the physical aspects of life, but not the essence of life. Just a little while ago, I told you that these living networks are intrinsically creative, regenerative, and intelligent. Those phenomena are not described by physics. So I had to go beyond physics and to look for a framework in which I could deal with various dimensions of life, the biological, the cognitive, the social, the ecological. And so I came upon this systems view, which is not at the time, was not a well-formulated theory. This was in the early 1980s. And so in my second book, The Turning Point, I sort of took a first attempt in summarizing this systems view. And not much was available at the time. And then over the years, I worked on it, and we had much more progress in science. And so this is how I proceeded. It was a long journey.
And the journey goes on.
Yes, absolutely.
So what can we do to spread systemic thinking, system thinking?
Well, I think you can just have conversations. And today we have this huge infrastructure of social media. And so especially young people can say, look, I heard something very interesting. I took this class and they were talking about living networks and that were saying that they are creative and regenerative and intelligent. And I find this really interesting. And then they can repost it or retweet it or whatever, Instagram it. You know, our young people have all these means to spread the word. So technically, it's not difficult. You just have to decide to do it. Start a conversation.
So using the continuous perpetual regenerative communication network.
Exactly.
Let me ask you, how do we find ways to change our view of the world? Move from a linear to a systemic view. How would you describe this difference?
Yeah, well, it's not easy at a practical level. It's not easy. You know, theoretically, I have described it in the course, but practically, it's not easy because we have all been educated in institutions that emphasize separation and fragmentation and a mechanistic view. So I would say the best way, and again, it's a similar answer that I gave to your last question, the best way is to create small groups, say within an organization, have a lunch meeting on Friday, or have a pizza night on Saturday night, or something like that. Maybe not Saturday night, people want to go out Saturday night, but you know, some time, have an informal gathering to change your view. Let me tell you a story, because I mentioned pizza night. Many years ago, I gave a seminar in England, in Leeds, to a bank. And the employees of this bank were all very young. They were in their 30s. And across the street from the bank was the University of Leeds. And so somebody had the brilliant idea to invite the graduate students on Friday night for pizza night. That's where I got the idea from. And you know how students are, when they get free pizza, they come. So it was very successful. And during this evening, which went on for many months, they just started conversations about their graduate work at the university and the work of the bank and finance and economics and housing. The specialty of the bank was mortgages, you know, when you buy a house, you take a loan, and that they were giving those loans, and that had all kinds of questions. So it was a very, very stimulating atmosphere of cross-fertilization between the bank and the university. And to me, this is a good example. Start something like this, an informal meeting that becomes interesting, and specifically with, you know, practicing thinking in terms of networks and relationships. You could say, let's talk about networks. What kind of networks are there? And come to think of it, what is a network? How do you define a network? How do you describe a network? Are there different kinds of networks, and what's the difference? And so on. Just start the conversation.
In every organization is getting every day clearer. Then it's a matter of how we stay together. Okay. So how to work in groups with a systemic approach?
Well, this is a very, very interesting phenomenon here. When you look at an organization, then most of our organizations are still structured hierarchically. You have a boss or a director or a president, and then you have a board of directors, and then you have departments with department heads, and so on, a hierarchical structure. But at the same time, every organization has a network structure, because when people go to work, they talk to their colleagues, they make friendships. And for example, you might have a colleague and your kids go in the same school. So you have something to talk about your children, about the school. You help each other, you form alliances. So these networks, these human networks, form spontaneously. Why? Well, because principle number one, life organizes itself in networks. So every organization has networks. And so the trick then for a really smart organization is to recognize these networks, to support these networks when they have, you know, newsletters or some kind of, you know, discussion platforms or whatever, to support this, to legitimize them, and to see whether they come up with new ideas for the company. And if so, if they can be incorporated into the formal structure. So there are formal and informal structures in every company. And The task is to recognize and legitimize the informal structures. They are there already. You don't have to create them.
And let's talk a little bit about leadership. So what characteristics must a systemic leadership develop?
Well, a systemic leadership, that's also a very interesting question. I come back to the phenomenon of emergence, the creativity of life. If the emergence of new ideas is something characteristic of a living network, then a systemic leader will support that, will not tell people what to do. Sometimes it's necessary to tell people what to do in crisis situations and so on. But most of the time, you can create an environment to maximize this creativity, to maximize this emergence. And in order to do so, you will have to study the process of emergence, which I discuss it in the course, and I discuss it in the book, Vita e Natura. And first of all, for emergence to happen, you need an active network. You need a network with cycles built into, with feedback loops. You need to trust the process, because before the emergence of novelty comes a situation of instability, which can also be a situation of uncertainty, of insecurity, of crisis. And a leader, a systemic leader, will know this process and will trust it, and will say, in this state of insecurity, we need to interconnect, we need to network even more than before, and then hopefully something new will emerge. And of course, not everything that emerges is useful. So you will then have to use your faculty of analysis to decide whether this is actually viable or not. But very, very often it will be. And it will be because the people in an organization who work on the ground or in the field or on the factory floor or wherever are in touch with the daily problems of the company, and they will find solutions much easier than somebody very far removed at the top of a hierarchy. So systemic leadership means facilitating emergence and optimizing the intrinsic creativity of the organization.
Great, thank you. I think also, if I can add, try to fix a common language, which is not easy sometimes, most of the times.
Yeah.
And to share experience. So, what is a sustainable relationship for you?
Well, the concept of sustainability was introduced a long time ago in the early 1980s and has often been misused since then. People talk about sustainable profit and sustainable growth and sustainable all kinds of things. The true meaning of sustainability is an ecological meaning, and it refers to nature's ability to sustain life. And how does nature sustain life? Well, through regeneration, through continual regeneration. That's very closely linked to sustainability. And in a human community, our task and our challenge is not to interfere with nature's intrinsic ability to sustain life, but to support it, to work with nature, to learn from nature, to take nature as a model and as a mentor. This would be a proper way of enacting the concept of sustainability.
Well, you say life enhancing and not life destroying.
Right.
So how to look for this dynamic in daily life?
Well, I think we can learn a lot from nature, because nature has 3 billion years of evolutionary experience, and so we can study how does nature sustain life. Well, there are certain patterns of organization in ecosystems. The first lesson to learn is that no living organism can exist and survive alone. It always needs metabolic flows of energy and matter, which come mostly from other organisms. It needs a whole network of life. So in order to have to live sustainably, you have to live in communities. And I think this is an extremely important lesson that we haven't touched on in the last hour, that to live sustainable is to live in a community. The unit of sustainability is the community. And today, we have several reasons why community is so important, and the sustainability is one of them. The other one is that, as I mentioned, this obsession with continuing material growth is one of our key dilemmas. And in our daily lives, we are exposed to a constant barrage of advertising, which tells us you will be happy if you buy this product. And so, and many of these products are, completely meaningless and are made just to make money. And so if we can counteract this tendency by saying that we find happiness not in material consumption, but in human relationships, in other words, in community. And here again, Michele, I think that our young people have got that already, and do that to a large extent. I remember when I was a teenager in the 1950s, long time ago, our dream, us young boys in school, our dream was to own a car, a big clunky machine. Today, the dream of young people, say of a 12-year-old, is to own a cell phone, a means of communication, a means that links them to community. So they have already replaced material consumption with something very different, a tool to maintain human relationships. And I think for that reason also community is so important. So creating and nurturing communities, I think, is the golden road toward sustainability.
What can I say? Thank you very much, Fritjof. This was my last question.
These are great questions. I want to congratulate your students for these questions. And thank you, Michele, for stringing them together in such an eloquent way. This was a true pleasure. And I
pleasure for us, for the whole community. For the whole community, and we hope to meet you again and again.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.